So I have another nice lick for you, and today, more important than the actual lick itself, I think, is the idea behind it, which is a concept that I find very helpful for soloing and improvising over chord progressions. So the idea is this: we have a simple chord progression in the key of C. It's just C, D minor, F and G, and rather than take the more standard scale-based approach to soloing over that, you could just take a C major scale and noodle away to your heart's content. But rather than do that, we're going to follow the chord changes using some triad shapes, and we're going to add in some extra notes to those triads just to make things a bit more interesting. Now, I'm a big fan of these little 3-note triad shapes. Not only are they super useful for coming up with great rhythm guitar parts, but they're also great for using when you're soloing. You can make little melodies and ideas out of those notes. And the beauty of using triads when you're soloing is that you really can't go wrong, because all of the notes are going to be a perfect fit to the chords that you're playing over. Sometimes when you're soloing using a scale, it's a bit hit or miss whether you're going to hit the right note or not, but that won't happen with triads because all of the notes are actually in the chords that you're playing over. So let's get to it. I'm of course going to show you the actual lick that I played just now, but also want to talk a little bit about triad theory and just generally about how you might use this stuff when you're improvising and making up ideas of your own. Let's start by grabbing this little C major triad shape. Now, what is a C major triad? We all know what a C chord is, and a C triad is really just a C major chord stripped down to its bare essentials. Now, for a C major chord to be a C major chord, we need 3 notes. We need the root, the third and the fifth, and those notes are derived from the C major scale. So if we take the first note, which is obviously going to be C, the third note is E, and the fifth note is G, C, E, G. That's our C major triad. Now, there are a number of ways of finding these notes on the fretboard. In this lesson, we're just going to be dealing with this particular shape. We've got a C note here, 5th fret on the G string. We've got an E at the 5th fret on the B string, and we've got a G at the 3rd fret on the high E string. So there are a number of things to be aware of here. First of all, there's the finger shape, which it's important to learn. Then I think it's important to be aware of the actual note names themselves in these triad shapes. So in the case of a C major triad, we have C, E and G. And also, perhaps most importantly, it's important to be aware of the function of these notes. Now, what I mean by the function is whether the notes we're playing are a root or a third or a fifth, what role they have in relation to the harmony. So in the case of this particular triad shape, this C note is the root note. That's the home note, I suppose, of this triad. Then we've got the third, which is on the B string, and then we've got the fifth on the high E string. So you can talk about this triad as being voiced root, third and fifth. And in particular, it's important to know where the roots are, because this is actually a movable triad shape. If you play it here, it's a C major triad, but if you move it higher or lower on the neck, you can play all of the other possible triad shapes. And in order to find the triad you want, you're going to need to be aware of those root notes. So if I move this shape 2 frets higher, we have a D major triad, because the root note I'm now playing is a D. This root note is found along the length of the G string. So that's a D major triad. If I play it up here, that's an F, that's a G. Now, we're also going to need to know a minor triad shape. And the easiest way to think about this is just by adjusting the major triad shape that we just looked at. Now the difference between a major triad and a minor triad is just one note. So instead of root third fifth, we've got root flat third fifth. Again, we're deriving these notes from a C major scale. So the third of a C major scale is an E. Make that flat. We go 1 fret lower, we've got an E flat. In the case of our little triad shape here, we can simply change that E note to an E flat by moving it 1 fret lower, and we arrive at this shape. And once again, we've got the finger shape. We've got the names of the notes in that shape, C, E flat, G, and then we've got the function of the notes. We've got the root on the G string, that's the flat third on the B string, and then the fifth, that's the same as in the major triad on the high E string. So that's our minor triad shape, and once again it's a movable triad shape. We've got our root along the length of the G string, so if you want to play a D minor triad, there it is. If you want to play a G minor triad, you just need to find a G note along the length of this string. There it is. There's our G minor triad. So the first step, once you know these two shapes, is to apply it to our chord progression. Now our chord progression, the progression that I was playing over at the start of this video, if you remember, was just C, then D minor, F, and G. So all of those chords in the key of C major. It's the 1 chord, the 2, the 4 and the 5, and I'm simply going to follow those chords using these triad shapes. So the shapes that I'm going to be thinking about are C major, then D minor, and I'm coming up to the 10th fret. This is an F root note here, so we've got F major, and then we've got G major with the root at the 12th fret. And first thing I might do is I could just do a very simple improvisation using those shapes. So let me just set my loop going and I'll try and do that. So here comes the C chord, D minor, F, and then G. So you get the idea. Not the most spectacular solo, but it sounds like I know what I'm doing. I'm following the chord progression and I'm playing the appropriate notes in the right places. And it's really down to you just to mess about with those notes and juggle with them and to try and make some music. So try and come up with some interesting rhythmic ideas. You can of course play notes more than once and mix them up a little bit. You don't have to play all of the notes in the triad every time either. You could just use 1 or 2 of the notes. So that's step 1. The next thing we can do is just add in some extra notes to those triads just to make things sound a bit more interesting. Sometimes triads sound a bit too correct and they just fit the chords a bit too well, and maybe you want a little bit of dissonance or a little bit more colour in your improvising. So one of the things that I like to do is to add in the 2nd or the 9th to the basic triad. So if we start with our C major triad shape here, I'm going to include this note here, which is a D. That's the 2nd note of the C major scale. You could refer to that as the 9th as well if you wanted to. So now we've got 4 notes to play around with. We've got C, D, E and G, and that's just going to give us a little bit more colour, and we can now play around with those 4 notes. We can do the same thing with D minor. So to the D minor triad I'm going to add in an E. So we've now got D, E, F and A. So it's the root, the 9th or the 2nd, flat 3rd, 5th. Same thing with the F. Adding in this G note here, which is the 9th or the 2nd up from F. And the same thing on the G triad. So I can try improvising again. This time I'm going to include those extra notes, and you'll notice how it sounds a little bit more colourful. Moving on then to the lick itself, and that goes like this. And all I'm doing with this lick is I'm just juggling with our little 4-note shape, so the triad plus the extra second which is added in there. So starting off with our C major triad, and all I'm doing is just going up and down that little 4-note shape. I'm starting on the C, then I'm playing D, E to G, and then I'm just coming back down again, E, D, C. So I'm just creating that little cycle of notes. Just to help it flow a bit more smoothly, I'm actually throwing in a hammer-on or a pull-off between the D and the E. So it's pick, pick, hammer, pick, pick, pull-off, pick. Then you can create a nice smoothly flowing cycle of notes. So that's the basic idea. We've got a bar on each of the chords in this chord progression, so I'm just filling up that time with 16th notes based on this pattern. So we've got 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and That's the last note in this bar. Then I'm sliding up along the length of the high E string into the next shape. So now I'm into my D minor triad shape, but this time I'm starting on the highest note and then descending and then getting into that cycling pattern. So the pattern we've got here is A, F, E, D, E, F, A, F, E, D, E, F. And again, we've got a hammer on or a pull off between the E and the F notes on the B string. So, and we've got a bar's worth of that. So 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Then we're going to slide up, this time on the G string, to get to the F chord shape, and we're doing the same thing. A bar's worth of that. Then we're sliding on the high E string and descending in the G triad shape. And you'll notice just how the lick falls and the number of notes in this pattern, that we're kind of zigzagging. So we're starting by ascending on the C, and then we're descending on the D minor, ascending on the F, descending on the G. So it's got a nice kind of zigzag quality as you move up the neck. So let me try and put all of that together slowly for you. We've got 2, 3, 4. Then you can repeat the lick. I think what I did in the lick at the start of this video is I just threw in some variations when I got up to the G, just to break up that stream of 16th notes a little bit. So something like that. And I think I rounded the lick off with this. So just a D, B, and then stretching up for a high G there. So that's the lick. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the right hand picking, as there are probably quite a lot of ways that you could do this. On my tab, which I'm going to write out and put on my Patreon page, I'm going to show the way that I would pick this particular lick, but really I recommend that you just experiment with that and find what works best and what flows the most smoothly for you. But let me just finish by putting my loop on and then playing through the lick one more time so you can hear it in context. So that's about it for today, groovers. I hope you enjoy learning this lick, and I hope you enjoy exploring this whole concept of improvising using triad shapes. Obviously in this short lesson I've only been able to scratch the surface of what you can do with these things, and there's lots more that you could explore. Obviously you could use these triad shapes to improvise over just about any chord progression you can think of. Lots of other ways that you can organise these triads on the guitar, different ways you can map them out over the fretboards. So if this idea grabs you, then I suggest you do some thinking and some exploring on your own and take this whole idea a bit further. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.